You guys, welcome to another episode of Soft Rebellion. My name is Ntat, and thank you so much for joining me. So, I want to tell a story today about the second relationship I've ever been in. I dated this guy. His name is Simpiwe. And Simpiwe seemed like such an amazing guy. As I'm telling the story, I'm cognizant of the fact that I had a conversation with a friend, and she's like, "Oh, I wonder how these people feel when they hear stories being told about themselves." And I want to premise this story by saying I'm very much aware that everything I say here is my truth. It's my lived experience. It might be skewed by whatever biases exist, but it is my story. It might not be nice to hear to the next person. It might not even be, entertaining or even seem fair, but it is my truth. And today I feel so compelled to tell this story. I don't know why. But I just have such a heavy heart, and I finally pinpointed it to this specific story as I was, hanging my laundry downstairs. But anyway, back to the story. Simpiwe seemed amazing. I think he found me on LinkedIn, and then went to message me on Instagram. It wasn't very hard because I used my full names on Instagram back then. And then realized that, this person had viewed my profile on LinkedIn a couple of days prior. Maybe a week or so later after, having been talking on WhatsApp, we met. We had a date in Rosebank. And there was a moment where we fought in the date because I just thought, oh my goodness, this guy, I was telling him a story about an ex and he just defended this guy. And I'm like, you don't even know this guy. I'm here. But you're defending some guy you've never even met. I remember that being our first quarrel. But somehow the date turned around and we got along and we made out in the car for like an hour or something. It seemed like forever, It was actually quite nice. And in that moment, he told me he loved me. And since then, the relationship just took off so quickly, and he was asking me to be his girlfriend. It seemed sudden, and I thought all of this is crazy. But at the time, I was really going through a difficult time, and I thought, but what if this is also like, this is the love of my life. This is meant to be the person I'm going to be with for the rest of my life. Also, it felt so good, guys. It felt like relief, a breath of fresh air from everything in my life going wrong. I just lost my job. I had started a company which wasn't doing well. At the time, I'd lost a sister as well. Like, emotionally, I was just a wreck, which in hindsight should have been indicative of the fact that I couldn't have been, in a state where I should be pursuing a new relationship. But I went ahead and agreed to be his girlfriend. And it was around the time of COVID-19. So we spent a lot of time together. I mean, I was still working to establish my business. So there wasn't a lot of work necessarily, more admin than client facing, because I was still hunting for clients. I didn't have a lot of project work, just a few that I was fulfilling. But yeah, that was the dynamic. So I spent a lot of time in his place. Everything seemed perfect. It was easy. He lived with his kids, had just gone through a divorce and everything. I mean, I never really batted an eye at those things because I just was interested in the person, and he seemed to be experienced. And I was 27 years old at the time, which, looking back, seems like I was very, very young, and I suppose I was. But I thought I was mature at the time, and I'd seen life. So what could you tell me? Also, because he didn't look old, he was a very gorgeous man, like gorgeous man, tall. He looked after himself. He used to exercise, so he was quite muscular and well built, But soon I realized how all-consuming that relationship was, In fact, I didn't realize, but the relationship was all consuming. And Simpio would say all these bizarre things. He'd say things like, oh, he can see the future, or whatever. And I know there are people with gifts to a certain extent. I'm also, or there are moments where I'm able to see, certain things, but it's very random. So I understand people are spiritually gifted or they are intuitive about certain things, but he would make the wildest claims, that in his previous life he used to be a lion or whatever. I don't know, those kind of things. And I'm just like, this is wild, but I would ignore it. But over time, some of the things he would claim would form part of how I viewed him, how I perceived him, right? Because I don't know how it worked or the psychology behind it, but it became believable. And I suppose it also created a lot of fear around him. I didn't know how to express it at the time, but there was a fear attached to being in a relationship with him, that if I did anything, he would know, that I couldn't conceal my feelings because he would just know, and I remember being on a live this other time and he just suddenly changed. We're supposed to go somewhere and he says, you're entertaining men, you out here laughing with men. And I was so confused because that just seemed so random and out of the blue, right? But it's because I was on a live with, one of my male friends from Instagram. We're not really even friends, but I follow him on Instagram and he follows me. But he would make these wild accusations that would leave me so confused. And like after that, he would apologize, obviously. But it became a trend, when we're happy and stuff, something very small would tick him off and then he just interprets it in a very different way. And it just seemed like he was getting energized from conflict. Anytime there was conflict, and he didn't mind causing conflict about things that didn't matter. I remember, the one time us picking mulberries from his trees. I was there with his kids. We were picking mulberries and some on his floor and then others from the tree. And I said, oh, can we put, the ones on the floor or in a different cup, whereas the ones that we would have picked from the tree would be in a different container as well, because the others had more dirt, And I was like, no, it doesn't matter. We're going to wash them. We can just put them in the same bowl. And that became a big argument, which I didn't understand, because I'm like, you don't need to intervene about this small thing. Why was it so necessary for you to do so? Because it's trivial. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that I make a decision about this one specific thing. It changes nothing, but he just had to control everything. And I realize now how so much of my life at the time was controlled by him. Obviously, I'm able to make that realization in hindsight, right? And those are just really small things that I identified in the beginning. It got worse as time went. But during that time, there were also really positive memories as well. Eventually, after 5 months of back and forth as well, I left the relationship. But by the time I left, emotionally, I was even more of a wreck than before. My self-esteem was on the floor. I was just so confused and scared and battered, if you will, and the only reason I ever escaped that relationship, there's no need to call out the fact that there was emotional abuse. Luckily, there wasn't any physical abuse. There was definitely sexual abuse there as well. But I didn't know it at the time. I only had the realization when I would tell my friend the story, and I was like, and this happened, and I was so confused. And my friend would you realize that this was XYZ, right? And only then did it occur to me that, oh my goodness, this has been happening all along, but I've just been explaining it away. I remember a moment where we'd gone to dinner. It was 2 months into the relationship, and I met one of his guy friends in Bryanston. He lived in Bryanston. There's a famous restaurant there, and I hate it so much. Like, every time I think about that restaurant, it reminds me of that night, And I remember I'd had a glass of wine, and by the time I had a second one, I was almost passing out. And I thought, I've got a lot of tolerance for wine, and I don't understand why I'm passing out, But yeah, that's just one of the memories I've got. And the point I was making was that, like, leaving that relationship only made me realize how bad things had gotten, And every time people talk about, why do women in abusive relationships always stay, why don't they go, they leave or whatever. And I really don't have the language to explain the psychology of this, but sometimes it really could be that they don't see it. I didn't see it. And to this day, I probably wouldn't have escaped that thing or that relationship, because I remember thinking, this is not right or this is not healthy. But the thought of leaving him was more daunting than being in it, and there was nothing really of value that I got from that relationship, but I was just exhausted, besides the fear, because that was also a part of it. But I was just so exhausted mentally thinking about leaving. And I think part of the reason why I successfully left was because he also left it, or he wanted to leave as well, because I had a strong group of friends who advocated for me, even without knowing the dynamics of the relationship. They were so present in my life, and they loved me in the most gentle and tender ways. I can never think about that moment without getting emotional. But yeah, when I think about my friends during that time, I count myself lucky. And I know that it's not many people who are just as lucky, to have a group of friends around them who love them with tenderness and who call out evil unknowingly, and who encourage their friends to stand up against whatever they're dealing with in their personal lives, But I can also, accept the fact that what Simpiwe did, or that relationship with him, changed me. Obviously, without a doubt. But it also changed so many things in my life, including my friendships. I think, and I hate this, but I feel like it stole a lot from me, But thank God I still have my life, because I don't know what would have happened. I would have died. The person that you guys see today, who is so full of life, who chooses joy even when it's hard, who tries to see the best in everyone and be optimistic, that isn't by accident. It's a deliberate choice I make every day, And when I talk about darkness looming, that isn't theoretical either. It's a constant battle between letting out all the rage and, just literally wilding out on everyone. Because the world is insane, and we've got every right to do so, because what sane person wouldn't, right? So I try to keep everything at bay and choose joy and choose light. But I can also, recognize that for a while my friendships were, at least the ones that existed during the time Gasimpiwe and had knowledge of what was happening in that relationship, they became scared for me, and I know it came from a good place, and they love me and care for me. But as I was navigating dating again, there's a whole trail of evidence for that journey. But there would always be cautions about, be careful, be safe, and whatnot. So I felt like I couldn't express myself as anything other than Simpiwe's victim, even when they weren't even trying to see me that way. But it just felt like I'll never escape that identity, And I don't know if talking about this publicly even, helps in any way, because I don't want to be seen like that. But maybe it's even gonna, force a stigma on me about having been someone's survivor or whatever that looks like. I don't know. I'm sure people are curious about what happens in my mind and why I share about, being on talking stages with multiple women in the way that I do. And maybe this explains it. I have no idea. And I hate that people will now, psychoanalyze me, but I can't control what people think. And what I can control is my truth, and my life and my experiences. And part of how this experience with Simpiwe changed me is how I am now quite vigilant. I always was, but now I'm more so in terms of romantic relationship and the potential abuse that exists there. I can spot it. I'm not always right, but when I do suspect that there might be a potential abuse, I always wish I can be a smile or an umpile to whoever is potentially facing that abuse. I always think, maybe if I love them enough, they'll escape that situation, because my friends loved me enough for me to escape that situation, And maybe there was an invisible hand at play as well, over and above my friends. I don't know. A mercy, if you will. I have no idea. But I always think, I'll just love them enough. And I suppose I see myself in some of the people as well. And my heart breaks knowing that maybe they don't even know. They aren't even aware of the situation that they find themselves. And only afterwards will they really see it for what it is. And that breaks my heart. But I realized that it's not my responsibility to save people. And actually, just because something seems like it may be abusive doesn't mean that it always is. It could be that my vision or perception has since been flawed by experiencing Simpiwe in the way that I did. And I'm not able to see things objectively. I'm always seeing them through the eyes of an abused person. I don't know, and I hate that term, but yeah. And I'm realizing to a certain extent it is very pompous, cocky even, of me to think I can save someone. I don't have that power. Only God can save someone. Only a person can save themselves, really. By thinking that they are powerless to whatever situation they find themselves, I'm just undermining their ability to exercise their agency and their discretion and free will and whatever else, because they're adults, right? So that's been a very hard lesson to learn. And I think it's part of the reason why I'm just feeling helpless right now, because it's like, oh my God, will they be okay? I don't know. I feel like I'm speaking in riddles because I can't go into detail. But yeah, that's my story. And I mean, there's no doubt that the experience with Simpiwe changed me, like I said, but I don't think it's also a unique story. It's not unique to me. If anything, I'm always grateful that I had it easy. There was another woman that he was seeing round about the same time. I only found out later. He had told me that she was an ex, but it turns out he was actually seeing both of us at the same time. She had a kid by him, and her entire life is literally centered around this guy, and he's still very much involved in her life, even if he's not present, even if there's no communication, but he will always be present in her life. And it's a mercy that I will forever be grateful to God for. And it's the reason I know that God exists, because I've got nothing that ties me to that man. And with her, there was also physical abuse and financial abuse. I think he was starting to abuse me financially, feeling entitled to some of the money that I went, and the swearing and it was just a vulgar situation. But I'm so glad that I left just in 5 months of that relationship. It feels long when I think about it. And I'm like, how did I stay there for 5 long months? I should have left after 2 months, when all of this started. But she stayed for 3 years. And I don't blame her. I understand. I fully understand. And I think that's why I pride myself on being such a good friend and being present for my friends, because I understand there's so much struggles that we all experience, which we don't often talk about, or sometimes that we aren't even aware of. But deep down it's happening and we just keep letting it happen, and there's no adult to call it, to correct it, or to keep the people accountable. But we only have our friends, whom we can do life with, who can provide, moments of relief with their joy and happiness and just their mere existence. But I realize that sometimes that comes at my own cost, and I don't like the person I'm becoming in service of certain friendships. So having to let go of that identity is not easy. Oh my gosh. Why am I so emotional? Hold on. But I was saying, having to let go of, these ideas I've got about friendship and sisterhood. And I always feel bad saying sisterhood because it includes my, or it might seem like it's excluding him, but he's part of the sisterhood. He's one of the girls, But lately I really have been struggling with the idea of this friendship I've got, and the fact that maybe it's not always going to look like that. And it's okay. I can let that idea go. But it almost feels like I'm letting go of something so sacred, or something that could potentially save people. I feel like I'm abandoning myself and I'm abandoning people by letting go of that, of the ideas I've got about what friendship looks like and how I show up in those friendships. But I can't afford to keep holding on because it's causing me harm. It feels like a betrayal of self sometimes. So, yeah, that's what I want to say. Goodness, I don't want this to be long. And I don't even know what the point is. But I suppose I've been sensing, that I'm coming into a new era. And not knowing really why that is the case or where that's coming from. But I really think this is the source of where the disconnect was coming from. And yeah, I don't know what that's going to look like, in the spirit of being selfish and putting myself first. I don't know, because I always think I'm doing good. But I'm realizing that sometimes, like when I try to think about other people and neglect myself in the process, I'm not doing myself I'm doing myself a disservice. And I think there's a lot of build up that exists, and I don't want to get to a place where I explode or I hurt those around me. But what these couple of months have shown me is that I'm also just as capable of causing harm to the people I love, and I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to, to harm others. I mean, even with this platform where I share my experiences, and my life, unfortunately it includes other people, right? So somehow they do end up being implicated. I just hope that it doesn't cause grave harm to them. I think it's unavoidable sometimes. It's impossible for me to tell my story without telling their stories, even though the experiences of the same story and events may be different. But yeah, and I think maybe it's for the best that I start putting myself first and start being selfish, because yeah, it's for the best. And letting go of ideas about what friendship should look like, or trying to save everyone, because that's impossible. And that's just a momentous task that will end up draining me. But yeah, this was all over the place, but that's where I'm at. And that was heavy. So thank you so much, you guys, for listening. I do appreciate each and every one of you. Please follow the show. Share your thoughts. Leave a review or a comment. I don't want to hear, cliche messages about, oh, you're so strong, whatever, none of that niche. And I think this is not a unique story. This is not an expose, or one that's intended to disparage someone. It just happens to be the source of, the big feelings I was feeling today. Or at least part of it, because I feel like there's just been so many mini betrayals that have happened over time, and that have led me to feeling these big emotions that I don't even know where to start addressing them, or who to be angry at or whatever. But yeah, this is me doing the work, whatever that looks like for myself. It might be weird. Someone said, oh, and you thought to go to a podcast where there's a whole lot of more people listening, which was a valid comment, but I suppose I've always likened this space to, a journal entry, if you will, or a mini therapy session for myself, where I just offload, my truth right now without censoring myself. It might not be someone else's truth. It might not be fair or right. It's a single story, like I said, but it is my truth and it is my feeling right now. It might change tomorrow. I don't know. And that's okay. It's okay to feel differently tomorrow. But right now, I feel this way. And I do want this to continue being a safe space for me to share my experiences. But obviously taking the responsibility for the potential harm that this can cause. I hope I don't do that. I don't contribute towards making the world a more difficult place, But yeah, I'm definitely embracing this new identity of being more selfish moving forward, self-serving and putting myself first. These are all things that seem very uncomfortable to me, because I don't know for how long I've always shown up for people, sometimes to my own expense, but to avoid outbursts or resenting others or whatever the case is, I'm putting myself first. Anyway, I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for listening, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers. Bye.